This year was a really interesting year in the survey data because it's the highest unfavorable ratings that we've ever shown in our history of polling. We see 60% of Americans have an unfavorable view of China. That's up 13 percentage points since last year. It's also the highest year-on-year growth in unfavorable attitudes that we've seen since we started asking the question in 2005. The ones that I think come through in the report really clearly that are interesting to note over time are especially partisan differences. So we see that Republicans tend to have a more unfavorable opinion of China than Democrats. That's true this year. It's also true in many of our years of polling over time, and we have a graphic that reveals that. One of the other interesting differences that we see regularly is that younger people tend to be more favorable towards China. That's true this year. It's also true in many of our past years of polling. So over time, we've always seen that very few Americans say that China's growing military is good for the United States. Only 11% of people say that it's good this year. And as you noted, half of Americans say that China's growing economy is good for the United States. Yeah, I would say that in general, as countries develop, we often can see that economic and military growth go hand in hand, but that doesn't mean that the American people necessarily evaluate them similarly. We have over time, though, asked whether or not Americans are more concerned about China's economic strength or China's military strength, and we see consistently that Americans are more concerned about China's economic strength. Yeah, so this year we asked an open-ended question that we also asked in 2007 and at one other point in time, where we asked whether or not people are, what group or country they think is the greatest threat facing the United States currently. And 24% of people in an open-ended question named China. That made it tied for first place with Russia, so they are the two most named threats facing the United States. In the case of China, that's doubled since 2007, when 12% of people said that China was the greatest threat. We really see that China and Russia stand out as particular threats for Americans, but they are perceived as different levels of threats by different groups. For example, Republicans are much more likely to name China as the greatest threat, Democrats much more likely to name Russia. So in 2018, we asked a question about specific elements of the U.S.-Chinese relationship and whether or not they were perceived as major threats by the American public. And we see that of the top 5 threats named, 3 of them are economic in nature. So it's the large amount of debt held by China, it's loss of jobs to China, and it's the trade deficit with China. But there are other elements that also rank highly, specifically climate change and cyber attacks. So there are a number of different facets that people might think of when they think of China that might be concerning to them. But those were specifically the things that Americans named as very serious problems when it comes to our relationship with China.